Each listener is invited to the Pyburn Street Church of Christ tomorrow night for a special event that we are holding. At 6 o'clock tomorrow evening, we will be having an area-wide gospel singing. There will be brothers and sisters in Christ from throughout northeast Arkansas and southeast Missouri who will come to Pocahontas and will engage in 2 hours of congregational singing. It's always a very enjoyable time that we get to spend and worship together with our brothers and sisters, and this will be followed by a time of fellowship, and we invite each one of you to come and be with us for this special night. The hymns that we sing contain wonderful messages. However, sometimes it seems that we get into a rut and we forget to pay attention to the words that we're singing. Today I'd like for us to take a look at one of the hymns that we sing and see the message that it brings forth. The hymn that I'm discussing is one that is entitled, "What Will Your Answer Be?" This hymn was written by Brother Tillett S. Tedley. Tedley was a minister and a hymn writer who spent much of his life living in Texas. Some of the hymns that he wrote are "Heaven Holds All to Me," "Worthy Art Thou," "The Lord's Supper," "True Worship," "Angels Are Singing," "Swiftly Returning," and many other common hymns. I'd like to share with you from Brother Tedley's own account of what prompted him to write this hymn. He said, in 1935, I was preaching for the church in Electra, Texas, and was returning home from a gospel meeting I had held in West Texas. I stopped in Vernon, Texas to attend a gospel meeting, and someone told me that the criminal court was in session and that the judge was going to pass sentence on a young man from Amarillo. He had been convicted of the murder of a young woman and her child. I had never been in a courtroom where the death sentence has been handed down, so I joined the crowd to see what it was like. In just a little while after I arrived, the judge asked the young man to stand, and he sentenced him to be put to death for the murders which he had committed. That moment sent a chill through me and many others in that courtroom, for it was an awful thing to hear. As Brother Tedley drove home the next day, he thought of that young man standing before the bar of justice to hear that terrible judgment pronounced. And he recalled the verses in Revelation chapter 20 that said the dead, small and great, stood before God, and they were judged out of the things that were written in the books, according to their works. His thoughts began to fill with the words of this hymn. Someday you'll stand at the bar on high. Someday your record you'll see. Someday you'll answer the question of life. What will your answer be? In this verse, we find that all will stand before the judgment seat of Christ. This song depicts the seriousness of the judgment day. This will be a universal judgment that all who have lived, are living, and all that will live will be a part of. There will be Jews, Gentiles, rich, poor, young, old, small, great. Every class and every nation will be there. No one is exempt from the judgment day. In Romans 14 and verse 10, and also 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 10, we're told all must stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Paul said to the Romans in Romans 14 and verse 12, "So then each of us shall give an account of himself to God." Speaking of Christ, Peter said in Acts 10 and verse 42 that he was ordained by God to judge the living and the dead. And isn't it so ironic that Jesus, who is the most judged person in history, will be the judge of all history? He stood before Pilate's judgment seat, but on the day of judgment, Pilate will stand before Christ. The Jews and Pilate both thought that they were the judge, when in all actuality they were judging themselves. On the day of judgment, we will have no secrets. Everything will be open and laid bare. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 5, "The Lord will bring to light the hidden things of darkness and reveal the counsels of the heart." Friends, God knows our heart and can therefore judge our motives, and nothing can be hidden from God. As the Hebrew writer said, there is no creature that is not manifest in his sight, but all things are made naked and open before the eyes of him with whom we have to do. Remember, brethren, that the record which we are writing in this life is the record that we will see when we stand before the great judge at the bar on high. Where will you spend your eternity? That's the question that must be answered. And in your case, what will your answer be? Friend, only you can answer that question for yourself. How are you living your life today? Are you living your life in keeping with the will of God, striving each and every day to please Him? Or are you lost in the world and seeking for the Lord? Friend, if you examine yourself and you find that there are spiritual needs in your life that we can assist you with, then we encourage you to make contact with us, and we will be glad to help you in getting your life right with God. Thank you for joining us today. Have a blessed day and a wonderful weekend ahead.